Hello guys, Fru here. Welcome to module 4 of our series Python for Beginners. So guys, in this module we're going to be looking at if and else statements within Python. So let's actually zoom in into our table of content. So for today we're going to look at if statements, we're going to look at else conditions, we're going to look at Elif conditions. Elif is actually a short form, else if statements are concatenated into one. And then we're also going to look at conditional statements with minimal code, and then at the very end we're going to look at nested if statements. Guys, the concept of if and conditionals within Python is a very powerful concept. And not just Python, for matter, for any programming language you're dealing with, there's always this concept of, well, I want to execute this piece of code if only this particular condition has been met, else I want to execute something else. All right, so it's a very powerful concept. It's more generic in programming, but today we're going to look at the specific syntax for within Python. So that said, we're going to dive into our very first scenario. And the very first scenario we're going to look at is being able to print a certain text on the screen based on if a particular condition has been met. If that condition hasn't been met, we don't want to go ahead and print that text on the screen. So let's start. We're going to set two variables. Our first variable will be x, and we're going to set x to 2, and our second variable will be y, and we're going to go ahead and set y to 8. Now the next thing that we want to do is to print x. Very straightforward. We've seen how to do this 1,000 times by now. So if you go ahead and print x, x is 2. All right, but here is what we want to do. We want to print the statement, say x is greater than y, right? And we want to print this statement if only x is truly greater than y. So let's go ahead and print that to say if, and we can throw our check in there and say if x is greater than y, then we want to execute this statement. And based on the syntax for Python, we're gonna have to indent this. So if x is greater than y, we want to go ahead and print that. All right, so now if I run this, you notice nothing is printed, and you're asking, but why wasn't that statement printed? Well, it's because I put a condition, and now I can only print if that condition has been met. And that's the whole idea behind if statements. If that condition hasn't been met, my statement would not be printed. So how do we fix this? All right, one way to quickly fix that is to change x to say x equals 9. Now if I run this, all right, x is greater than 9, this text gets printed. So guys, there you have it, plain and simple. The idea of using if statements, you can start injecting if statements within your code to execute particular sections if a condition is met, and to not execute particular sections if that condition hasn't been met. So very powerful. Now you must be asking, well, we've seen the scenario here of executing if statements, but what if indeed that condition isn't met? What else should we do? So we're gonna go ahead and go into the next concept here, which will talk about handling that else condition. So this is gonna talk about module 4.0.2, and here we're gonna talk about handling else condition. So if our if statement isn't met, all right, we can go ahead and handle the else condition. So in this case, we can say print x is less than y, and this would be a very legitimate statement to write. So again, we're checking for if statement, and if the if condition isn't met, then we're not executing this block of code. We're gonna go ahead and execute the second block of code, which is our else condition, and if that condition is met, then this second block of code is executed. So if we run this for a second, now we see x is greater than y. So this is what we're actually executing. But if I make a change here to make x less than y, and I run the same code, what we're gonna see here is that x is less than y. And guys, that's the power of if statements. You can now start putting pieces of your code and saying execute this if only the statement has been met or a condition has been met. And that's the whole idea why this is called conditionals. All right, and if that condition hasn't been met, don't execute it, execute something else. Very powerful. But this is going to be a good segue into our next part of this concept, the next concept here, which is talking about what happens if the if condition doesn't work. All right, and that's what we want to really address here. So if I run this code, there are certain scenarios where this condition will be broken. let's actually take a look at it and try, say we made x equals 8. What if we made x equals 8 and we print this statement? What do we expect, right? Let's give this a try. So if we set x equals 8, now you see what is printed on the screen. It says x is less than y. All right, x is less than y. Any person with grade school math will understand that this is not correct, right? Because x is 8, y is 8. So y is a computer program telling us that x is less than y. There is a problem. All right, and so when you have those situations where, or those edge cases where things are similar, or some other edge cases that might come up, you might want more additional checks within your code than just if else, right? You might want to check for multiple things to happen, right? So that scenario here would be, what if x is equals to y? We also need to handle that situation. So this is going to take us into the next concept within this module, which would be the idea of being able to handle else if condition. So if x is greater than y, if x is less than y, and if x is equals to y, we want to handle that situation. So we're going to keep this the same, and here I'm going to throw in a new check here, which is the Elif check. All right, and Elif is just simply else if in short. All right, and I would say if Elif x equals y, then we want to do something, and here we can go ahead and print x and y are equal. All right, so guys, this is perfectly legitimate, and now what this does for us is it actually handles more conditions than we can handle with just if else. So if you run this code, now we have a result that actually makes sense, and this is printing and telling us that x and y are equal. Now, last but not least, we are going to look at, well, this is not actually last, this is a concept 405. We're going to look at a scenario where and I'm gonna just put this on the screen, where we want to do the same if else statements but make it a little bit shorter. This is just something within Python, and we're showing this here just to have as a tool within the tool belt. You can write if else statements in a single line instead of going down the block approach. So here what I'm doing is I'm simply setting a string and saying set this string to this value if x is less than y, otherwise set that string to this value. You can legitimately do this within Python, almost like a shorthand. And if I was to explain what this is actually doing, what this is saying is if x less than y, right, we want to set st equals to this. So this is just let me write this in the long form of what we've just seen in the short form. All right, and then we can go ahead and say else, and the else condition would be setting that value to this. All right, so it's setting st equals that. So what we've seen here is basically something that can be written as this. So you can decide, do you want to write this short form or this form? For some people it's more readable, for some they prefer to do this if they just want to do a quick setting of a quick variable with if else. Perfectly legitimate to do that. Now in the last piece of this concept, we're going to look at the idea of nested if conditions within Python. So what we're going to do here is actually write a script that can check if a student's enrolled, if the student's name is John, if they have a GPA greater than 3 for them to graduate. And if those conditions aren't met, then we don't want to allow that student to graduate. Our script is going to print the message to say you are not allowed to graduate. So how do we go ahead and do that? So this will introduce us that concept of nested if statements. So instead of just having a single if and single else, we can actually begin to nest that. So I will start with a higher level check, which is enrollment, because if a student isn't even enrolled, then they really have no business in that school, and we shouldn't be checking for that, right? So if students enrolled, and we can also go ahead and say if student name equals John. All right, so we know that that's John, and now we can check and say if GPA total greater than or equals to 3.0, because that's the check threshold. All right, guys, then we can print a particular message. And what you see me doing here is being able to write nested statements, and here I'm checking for if condition, so you have to do the double quote. So in here now I can say print something like ready for graduation. All right, and so if those conditions are all met and those are nested conditions, then we can print that the student is ready for graduation. Else, if that condition isn't met and now we can handle our else situation, we can say we can print, and this else condition would be not ready for graduation. All right, because our conditions haven't been met. The nested conditions that we have hasn't been met. But you can see now I'm in this inner block here, if and else, and ending that else. Now if I'm in the position where this outer block, if this outer one, because you're matching this to this, did not even meet, then we know that the student is not John. So we can go ahead and print something like not John. All right, and so now we can end that else condition. Or otherwise we can go all the way to the outside and print something like not enrolled, because we're checking for enrolled. All right, so we're nesting a lot of if statements and we're able to leverage that within our script. So if I go ahead and I run this, it says not enrolled, right? Of course, because the student here is not enrolled. So if I change that to true and I run this, now the student is enrolled, is not ready for graduation, because guess what, GPA is not correct. So if I change that to true, now all the conditions are met and that student is ready for graduation. John is ready for graduation. All right guys, so there you have it. If and else statements are very, very powerful within programming, and I hope that this has given you some ideas on how to start writing or really taking your code or your scripts to the next level. Let's say you're building a website or an application, and a customer cannot buy an item if their cart is empty. Then you want to put an if statement or an else condition to check for that. All right, let's say a student, as we've seen here, cannot graduate. If a certain condition hasn't been made, your app can check for that. You might want to build an app for sleeping and said, well, don't alarm if a certain time hasn't been reached. And so your app will not alarm if that time hasn't been reached. So if and else, Elif and conditionals, very powerful within Python, very powerful for programming, and there's something really you should, or we should have within our tool belt. All right guys, so there you have it for this particular lecture, for this module. Very excited. Now the next one we're going to look at is going to talk about loops, and loops is going to build on the concept of if statements and show us how we can do things in a repeating pattern, for loops, while loops, and a lot more. Very powerful concepts guys. So just check for that. Depending on when you're watching this, it might be out or we might still be recording it. All right, thanks for watching. This has been Fru guys, and I'll see you in our next video.